Hey everybody, welcome to Unit 1, assignment number 5, First People, First Farmers. Tonight you're going to be reading pages 28 to 32, completing questions 23 through 25, and if you've ever been behind a truck like this, you'll get a lot of technological innovations and how this helps with farming. Not the best day to be driving with the windows down. Definitions I'd like you to look for. First is coincide, which means during the same time. It's located on page 28, and up you both go at the same time. Hindsight, which refers to understanding something after an event happens, is going to be located on page 30. And this, I don't think, was ever a good idea, but the more you watch, maybe he's going to talk himself out of it eventually. Don't get it. Profound, on page 30, refers to intense quality, and this is some serious quality from McDonald's. Not quite as good as the dancing kid with the fry, but, pretty close. And lastly is horticulture, which is a hoe-based agriculture. And you wouldn't have any idea how hard it is to find anything involving a hoe that isn't, But so here's our first one, using a hoe to farm. Catch you back here on page 3 or on page 28 for some question support. It is no accident that the agricultural revolution coincided with the end of the last ice age, a process of global warming that began some 16,000 years ago. By about 11,000 years ago, the ice age was over, and climatic conditions similar to those that our own time generally prevailed. This was but the latest of some 25 periods of glaciation and warming that have occurred over the past several million years of the Earth's history, and that are caused by minor periodic changes in the Earth's orbit around the Sun. The end of the last ice age, however, coincided, and highlight that word, coincided, with the migration of Homo sapiens across the planet and created new conditions that made agriculture more possible. Combined with active hunting by human societies, climate change in some areas helped to push into extinction various species of large mammals on which Paleolithic people had depended, thus adding to the pressure to find new food sources. The warmer, wetter, and more stable conditions, particularly in the tropical and temperate regions of the Earth, also permitted the flourishing of more wild plants, especially cereal grasses, which were the ancestors of many domesticated crops. What climate change took away with one hand, it apparently gave back with another. All right, question 23. Why is it no accident that the agricultural revolution coincided with the end of the last ice age? Stop and think and respond. Yeah, that's exactly right, because it essentially occurred generally the same time with human migration across the planet. Continuing on, page 29. Over their long history, gathering and hunting peoples had already developed a deep knowledge of the natural world and, in some cases, the ability to manage it actively. They had learned to make use of large number of plants and to hunt and eat both small and large animals, creating what archaeologists call a broad-spectrum diet. In the Middle East, people had developed sickles for cutting newly available wild grain, baskets to carry it, mortars and pestles to remove the husk, and storage pits to preserve it. Peoples of the Amazon and elsewhere had learned to cut back some plants to encourage the growth of their favorites. Native Australians had rebuilt elaborate traps in which they could capture, store, and harvest large numbers of eels. In hindsight, and highlight that word, hindsight, much of this looks like a kind of preparation for agriculture, because women in particular had long been intimately associated with collecting wild plants. They were the likely innovators who led the way to deliberate farming, with men perhaps taking the lead in domesticating animals. Clearly, the knowledge and technology necessary for agriculture were part of a longer process involving more intense human exploitation of the earth. Nowhere was agriculture an overnight invention. Question 24. You should cross out if it's not already, even though you could probably answer it now. It's not required for you to complete. Continuing on, page 30. Using such technologies and benefiting from the global warming at the end of the last ice age, gathering and hunting peoples in various resource-rich areas were able to settle down and establish more permanent villages, abandoning their nomadic ways and more intensively exploiting the local area. In settling down, however, they soon lost some of the skills of their ancestors and found themselves now required to support growing populations. Evidence for increasing human numbers around the world during this period of global warming has persuaded some scholars that agriculture was a response to the need for additional food, perhaps even a food crisis. Such conditions surely motivated people to experiment and to innovate in an effort to increase the food supply. Clearly, many of the breakthroughs to agriculture occurred only after gathering and hunting peoples had already grown substantially in numbers and had established a sedentary way of life. Göbekli Tepe in Turkey provides a possible example of the process. Klaus Schmidt, who was the chief archaeologist at the site, argues that the need for food to supply those who built and maintained this massive religious complex may well have stimulated the development of agriculture in the area. Certainly, some of the earliest domesticated wheat in the region has been located just 20 miles away and at roughly the same date. If this connection holds, it suggests that human impulse to worship collectively in a village-based setting played a significant role in generating the epic transformation of the agricultural revolution. These were some of the common patterns that facilitated the agricultural revolution. New opportunities appeared with the improved climate conditions at the end of the Ice Age. New knowledge and technology emerged as human communities explored and exploited that changed environment. The disappearance of many large mammals, growing populations, newly settled ways of life, and fluctuations in the process of global warming, all of these represented pressures or incentives to increase food production and thus to minimize the risks of life in a new era. From some combination of these opportunities and incentives emerged the profoundly, and highlight that word profoundly, transforming process of the agricultural revolution. Variations. This new way of life initially operated everywhere with a simple technology, the digging stick or hoe. Plows were developed much later, but the several transitions to this hoe-based agriculture, commonly known as horticulture, varied considerably, depending on what plants and animals were available locally. For example, potatoes were found in the Andes region, but not in Africa or Asia. Wheat and wild pigs existed in the Fertile Crescent, but not in the Americas. Furthermore, of the world's 200,000 plant species, only several hundred have been domesticated, and just 5 of these, wheat, corn, rice, barley, and sorghum, supply more than half of the calories that sustain human life. Only 14 species of large mammals have been successfully domesticated, of which sheep, pigs, goats, cattle, and horses have been the most important. Because they're stubborn, nervous, solitary, or finicky, many animals simply cannot be readily domesticated. In short, the kind of agricultural revolution that unfolded in particular places depended much on what happened to be available locally, and that, in turn, depended on sheer luck. Among the most favored areas, and the first to experience a full agricultural revolution, was the Fertile Crescent, an area sometimes known as Southwest Asia, consisting of present-day Iraq, Syria, Israel or Palestine, Jordan, and southern Turkey. In this region, an extraordinary variety of wild plants and animals capable of domestication provided a rich array of species on which the now largely settled gathering and hunting people could draw. What triggered the transition to agriculture, it seems, was a cold and dry spell between 11,000 and 9,500 BCE. A temporary interruption in the general process of global warming. Larger settled populations were now threatened with the loss of the wild plants and animals on which they had come to depend. Their solution was domestication. Figs were apparently the first cultivated crop dating back to about 9400 BCE. In the millennium or so that followed, wheat, barley, rye, peas, lentils, sheep, goats, pigs, and cattle all came under human control, providing the foundation for the world's first and most productive agricultural societies. Last question, 25. What was the first location of an area that experienced a full agricultural revolution? Stop and think and respond. Yeah, that's right. It was the Fertile Crescent. And that's all I have for you tonight, kids. Good luck with this. We'll see you tomorrow. Bye-bye.